get this started. So I'll start from scratch for you guys here, and we'll just start with some of the basic polygons. So one of the things that Shay didn't mention before last week was if you tap the spacebar, you can move between one viewport and 4 viewports. But if you hold down the space key, you actually get the hotbox in Maya, which has a lot of the tabs that you're looking for, and it's just a quick way of finding what you're looking for when you know where it is. So if we go into Create, we can get into our basic primitives, and just for this introduction, I'm going to take the cube, and we'll make a better cube than that. Sorry. There we go. And so once you have your basic primitive, you can, if you hold Alt, you can rotate around by left-clicking. If you right-click, you can basically zoom in and out, and if you hit the central scrolling wheel, you pan. And one of the things that I really wanted to just remind you guys was when you have a basic polygon like this and you look at your tabs to the right, you can go into the polygon settings and you can manipulate the height, depth, width, as well as the subdivisions of the polygon itself, which is really useful later on when you right-click, because you can go into the faces or the edges or the vertices of each polygon and select and manipulate individually. And just another recap from what Shay was saying before was the side keys here to your left are the scaling, the moving, as well as the rotate tool, which are the W, E, R, and Q keys, or a really bad spelling of work, if you need to have an acronym. So once you have these subdivides on these cubes, you can start to play around a little bit and pick the faces and pull and manipulate the polygon to create some weird shapes. So if you go into rotate, you can kind of move the polygon around in strange ways and scale individually by face, or if you wanted then to go back and right click into object mode, you can take the entire object itself and begin to scale it as a whole polygon. Sure, sorry. By the way, guys, if I am going too quickly, just put your hand up or yell slow down, and I will do that. I tend to speed up, but when you click on the polygon itself, you'll see these tabs to your right. This particular one is called Polycube 1, but of course you can go in and you can name it Test Cube. And then if you look down in the Polycube history, you'll see the width, height, and depth of the polygon, as well as the ability to subdivide it in different ways. So that's just your right tab here, which is always kind of your go-to when it comes to the properties of the polygon itself. Now, I'll just go back a little bit here. And of course, we're always here for questions after, or if you have more specific ones. But let's get into the actual polygon that you'll be working with. Get rid of that guy as well. I'll just create a new scene. So if we go into the file, into the import tab, locate the file that you have ready to go, I'm just going to see if I can remember what the name of the file was. Addy, what was the name of the file of your this paper? That's it. And you will probably have it in a very strange orientation when it comes in. There seems to be, like mentioned before, sometimes the Y and the Z planes are mixed up between the recap and the Maya space. And so the easiest way that I found to do it, and the other guys might have a quicker way, but what I typically do is I'll go to Modify, and I'll go down to Center Pivot. And so what that does is that centralizes the pivot point in the model space, so that I can just go into the Rotate tool or E, and rotate the model to the proper XY plane. And then I would go to the Move tool or W, and bring it back up to 0, 0. And just for the fun of it, I'm going to rotate this guy around as well. And there he is. Any questions? Was that too fast, or is that...
Could you go over the center pivot?
Sure, of course. So if you click onto your object, and you go under the Modify tab, you'll see Center Pivot, and that will bring it to the center of your polygon. Sometimes when you bring it in, the central pivot is off to the left or off in a corner, and then when you're rotating it around, it disorients you. So I find that this is a little bit more effective. Okay, and one of the things it's good to get into the habit of is once you have your mesh in, you'll want to reduce the mesh. So if you click onto your object, you can go into Mesh, and then you can go down to Reduce. And the little box to the side of the Reduce is the menu option, which just brings up the pop-up screen that you can take a look at, and you can reduce the mesh by however percentage you would like. For the purpose of this one, I'll say 75%. Which just gives you a little bit of an easier geometry to work with as you start to manipulate your iterations. And so let's just take a look here. Just rotate around this guy here. Yeah, that's a lot cleaner. Now, one of the things that you guys are going to have to do is you're going to have to create a matrix of polygons. Oh, yeah, sorry. Is it like the, sorry? It's similar, but at the same time, when you do bring it into Maya, it's just good to be able to either reduce it further once you start manipulating the faces, but it does just reduce those kind of triangulated mesh faces. Now, actually, I'm going to start by showing you how to get rid of that bottom plane that you have kind of located on that mesh there, because it's probably not something that you're going to manipulate with the geometry since it's not your actual model. And so what I tend to use for this guy is the multi-cut tool, which if you look under your top tab with the polygons, you'll see it here, where it looks like the X-Acto knife. And what I tend to do, because one of the problems with the multi-cut tool is when it cuts through the polygons, it tends to create a jagged line. I find that if you select your polygon and you select it so that it's selecting faces, I go into the Windows, General Editors, and then the Tool Settings, which brings up my multi-cut tool settings. And what I find with this guy is I can then go to slice along a plane and then click on, for this case, ZX, because I want to cut it along that XY axes. And then I drag the plane down to the bottom of the model where I want to cut it off. And doesn't seem to be an apply, so let's hope it cuts. Yeah. And so what that did was that created a slice across the model down this way. And I will select that bottom portion. Actually, one of the good tools with Maya is the soft selection tool, and the hotkey for this guy is B. And what this does is, rather than selecting individual faces, you can select kind of a series of faces or the corresponding faces around it, as well as the face itself. So you can't really see it here, but if I hold down B and I drag my mouse, then I start to be able to drag not only the face itself, but also the corresponding faces around it. And so once I have that, I can go in here. Just have to be quite careful. I don't know why it's not deleting right now. Nope. No, it was just my computer taking its time to listen to me. Which then kind of gives us the object itself to work with. And so now that we have the object itself, we can start to play around with it a little bit. Now, one of the things that you guys are going to be doing for Sunday is you're going to be creating a grid of iterations. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, so with soft selection, when you press B, you turn it on, and if you hold down B and you drag your mouse, it makes the brush larger or smaller. No, sorry, left click, yes. And your soft selection tool is on. Is anyone else having that problem as well? No? Okay, so once you have the model and the one that you want to manipulate, you can go into your top view or your perspective. Really, it doesn't matter which one. But if you click Control D, that's the quickest way to create a copy of the geometry that you have. And then if you click Shift D, you repeat the command as well as the distance, so you can kind of create that network of geometries that you can then go in and manipulate. And so I have a few geometries to play around with today. I'll just go into my perspective. And once you click onto one of them and you go into, let's say, faces, you can begin to take these faces and then through the hotkeys of W, E, R, and Q, you can start to either use the move tool to begin to pick up individual faces. And begin to pull out your geometry to basically face by face piece together exactly how you want this iteration to look. And then you can select the face here, and then or you can select a few faces, begin to rotate them around.
You're not really sculpting with like thinking of scale in mind, or like not thinking like sculpting or
When it comes to the initial iterations, I don't think you're thinking of individual elements like that. I think mainly you're just trying to achieve interesting variations of form. It's a form finding mechanism rather than a physical building. So we're just looking at ways of manipulating the mesh at this point. And so we can select a bunch of faces and move those guys up as a whole, or then you can go in and begin to kind of manipulate these guys around a little bit. And that looks pretty horrible. By the way, Control Z brings you back to the previous command, very similar to Photoshop or Illustrator. And one of the things to be aware of is if you begin to take a bunch of faces and you begin to pull them over others, like let's say we'll take a bunch of these faces and pull them through, you'll start to notice that some of these geometries are show up as black, pitch black, and that could indicate non-manifold surfaces, or surfaces that kind of fold in on top of each other. And so if you notice some of these faces, it's usually an indication that your geometry is probably going to give you a headache when you start to dissect it or try to build it out. So you can go in face by face and start to pull these guys out. So, and if you, sorry, I should have mentioned this before, if you hold down select, you can pick multiple faces and begin to extrude them out that way. So just pull these guys out. That guy's recurring. And so yeah, this is a very weird shape that we have going on here. Another tool that is very useful to use is the smoothing tool. So if you right click and you go down to, shift right click. Sorry, the shift. Yeah, it's not showing up there. Pardon me? Oh, have a selection. So I didn't have a problem with the soft selection before. Sorry guys. So yeah, there we go. So selected faces. Have your soft selection tool off. Apparently that brings down the option for smooth faces. And so if you select your faces and then you shift and then right click, you'll get the smooth faces option at the top there. So if you click onto the options, you'll see that the settings will have add divisions exponentially or linearly. I usually just keep it at exponentially, as well as the division levels, which just basically helps you control the kind of the level of smoothness that you'll achieve, as well as you can get into more advanced options about the open subdivide and the basically how you want to preserve the edges and corners as you smooth your tool or smooth your geometry with the tool. So we'll just click smooth, and then if you look at this corner here, you'll see that it's quite a bit smoother than before. The jagged geometry. Of course. So I will. All you have to do is you select the faces that you want to smooth, or you can select your entire model if you would like, and then you shift, right click, and then the first option on that list is the smooth faces option. And so if you click onto the square in the corner, that will bring up your smooth tool that you can then play around with. Are there any other questions or any things that I've kind of breezed through that you guys still have some questions about? Yes?
Quick question. For the black part you mentioned, it's two surfaces overlapping on each other. Is there a way to delete a surface?
Well, when it comes to the overall geometry, I usually find that rather than delete individual surfaces, because then you'll have individual holes in the mesh that you'd have to go in and fix. It's better to take the object and then just actually lift it up and try to just resolve that manifold surface edge. Yes?
When I go to reduce the mesh, it says I have to clean it up first.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Have you?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. There is a tool you can use called Clean Mesh. It will just recalculate the triangulation, and if there are any errors, it tries to fix them. So probably your scan is kind of messed up, and you can't do the options. So you need to clean that first. I don't know if Alex is going to cover that or not, but I will show it. I'll show it up.
All right. Right. So some of the things that I was also going to show right before giving it off to Madiar is I was going to show you one of the problems that you'll be facing after cutting off that bottom plane is now you've got that giant hole at the bottom of your mesh. And so one of the best ways to do that is to go into your right-click menu and select Edges. And then what you could do is if you go to the edge at the bottom of this polygon and double-click, it will basically select every edge around this open loop. And then you can shift, right-click, and go down to Fill Hole. And basically it will calculate and then refill that surface. Now going back to that question that you had before about deleting faces and meshes, that will work for individual faces. If you do decide that there is a polygon or a face that you just can't deal with, you will be able to get rid of those faces and then refill that hole and basically reconstruct that mesh. And so that's one of the ways to kind of a quick way to complete and create just a planar form. Another way is if you click on an edge at the bottom as well as a corresponding edge at the side, and then once again right click, you'll see a command called bridge. And so what that does is once you click that, try again. Go down to bridge. It will reconnect between those two edges, and you can kind of build a surface without just having it try to complete the entire thing for you, which can give you a little bit more of an ability to maneuver how this face will look. And so I was just going to, at this point, let's see. Let's just reconnect this guy here. Yeah, so just going to recap on some of the things that we talked about before. So selecting the faces, or you can select the entire object by right-clicking and going through these faces here. One thing that I kind of went quickly on before, which I will go over before passing it over to Madiar, is going into that multi-cut tool again. So I quickly showed you how to go into the tool settings and select a plane to cut it with, but that's not the only way, or not the only method of using this tool. So if you select the tool, you can actually select, drag, and then you'll have a line that basically cuts through your object. As you can see, I now have that that line that kind of follows that geometry, and then I can go into the soft selection tool, or let's use the lasso tool. So we can go into the lasso tool here, which very similar to the tool in Photoshop. You can kind of quickly select a lot of the faces at once, and the one problem is it is a little bit quick to select extra faces. Maybe I'll turn off soft selection. And basically, you'll be able at this point to break down the polygon. One of the things that I was always told was good to use as well was the paint selection tool, which just kind of helps you pinpoint some of the extra edges around the surface. Now, like I said before, sometimes with the multi-cut tool, it does create that jagged edge, which is why I suggested going into the modify the tool editor and bringing in the planar cut. It just I usually find it creates a much cleaner cut than just going in and doing the straight cut tool. But I'll pass the tutorial over to Madiar to kind of get through or take you through some of the other ways that you can manipulate and deform your shapes. So I will just clean this up for him.
Sorry, you can just leave one of them open.
I'll leave you 3.
Alright. And to keep the video size small, maybe we can stop and record again. So.
Sure.